This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet.
I think lying is bad, and I think if you were to run an ad that had a lie, that would be bad.
But how we move forward.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us to a very interesting debate, what I think is going to be a very interesting debate on a very controversial yet important subject. To help us through the subject, we have invited two wonderful speakers, Alina Bârgăoanu, who is a professor at the Romanian School of Political Sciences, Political and Administrative Sciences, and Tyson, who is the head of Technology and Foreign Policy Department at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you both for joining us and for taking on the challenge, because it is a challenge. We have a very interesting format that we are testing today, a format that was invented, to put it this way, initially by Oxford. It's an Oxford-style debate, which has been transformed for WebEx and for online debate by the German Marshall Fund of the United States. It's a 30-minute debate. We have two rounds with the two debaters who are going to take the yes side and the no side of the issue. We are going to have two polls before the debate and at the end of the debate to see if any of the speakers would have succeeded in changing, in shifting your opinion. The theme we have chosen today is social media. Moreover, we have asked the question, we are asking the question, should social media be censored? Because the social media has been invading our lives, has been taking over our lives, bringing with it both good things. We can see friends, we can see cats, very, very, very many cats. We can see old acquaintances from all over the globe. We can hook up with old friends. But it has also brought with it a lot of evil. It has brought disinformation, fake news, radicalization, all sorts of abuses, hate speech, to stop here. So the question we are facing with today, not only in this debate, but in our lives, is should we go ahead with the social media as it is? Or should somebody, some sort of body, take care of the social media and clean it up and make it more user-friendly, make it more people who want to know the truth friendly? Before we go into the debate itself and the two debaters will start boxing intellectually with each other, I do want to pose this question to you, to the audience. Should social media be censored? And please vote yes or no, as the pop-up will open into your screen, those who are watching us on WebEx. And I will take a couple of seconds to let you vote, and then I will announce the results of the vote. And then we'll go directly into the debate with Alina Bârgăoanu, who will be defending will be taking the yes position. Can I have the results of the poll? It's taking a little longer, so those of you who are watching us on WebEx, please make sure to vote. So, should social media be censored? You answered yes. Four people out of those watching us, which is a very small percent, and no, 7 people of those who are watching us, who is still a small percent, but a little bit more than yes. So let's say that for now, and a lot of you didn't answer, so maybe you will at the end of the round. So for now, let's say those who are in favor of no, so who are not favoring social media to be censored, are a little bit more than those who are opposing it. So let's start with Alina. Alina, should social media be censored? You have exactly 5 minutes to make up your case.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited about this format, and I will go straight into my arguments. There is a momentum across the entire transatlantic world that digital platforms have evolved, according to Timothy Garton-Ash, into the status of private superpowers. So please remember this term, I like it a lot, private superpowers. There are a lot of arguments in favor of this characterization of private superpowers, that come from academia, come from the NGO field, and most importantly, arguments that come from the official documents of the European Commission, or, for example, from the Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives in the United States. Let me parse through some of these arguments. There is growing evidence of monopolization and monopoly power. There is strong evidence about strong network effects and stifling of competition. For example, Facebook competes more vigorously among its own products, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, or Facebook Messenger, than competing with actual competitors. This is an established fact, and the same with Google and its products. And the second argument in favor of this characterization, private superpowers, is that they have taken control of citizens' lives, and most importantly for our debate today, they have taken control over the information menu with little public oversight. So there is a growing consensus that the digital platforms exercise monopoly power, and this monopoly power is more alarming since it is exercised, as I have said, over the public information spaces that have become network spaces that are neither public, that are neither private, thus unable to support a public good. The current privatized system of technology governance should be replaced, in my opinion, with a public system of oversight, especially where the digital platforms exercise their monopoly power over constitutional rights, over fundamental rights, such as the right to be informed. The right to be informed is a constitutional right which is guaranteed across the transatlantic world, but my opinion is that a sweeping update of this type of constitutional right should take place, adding rights such as the right not to receive unwanted information, the right not to be bombarded with hyper-personalized information that solely exploits your biases and your digital footprint, the right not to receive false and misleading information, especially when this false and misleading information is targeted to you by bots, software programs, and algorithms. I think that the famous statement from the US Congress in 2018, "Help us regulate Mark," is over. I think that there is a changing mood in the US Congress, in the EU institutions, and at the level of public opinion. And this changing mood means that regulators and governments should reclaim their power in creating rules and restrictions. I underline the term restrictions. So rules and restrictions in the technology sphere, especially when it comes to fundamental rights in a democracy, such as, again, the right to be informed, freedom of expression, pluralism of opinions, freedom of choice, fair competition, and non-discrimination.
Thank you. Thank you, Alina. You are very succinct in making your case. Let's see if Tyson can take up the challenge. Tyson, can you tell us in 5 minutes, no more, why the social media should not be censored?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to be virtually at the Bucharest Forum with Aspen, Romania, and GMF, two institutions that I admire greatly. And thanks for setting up this debate. I'd like to start with defining what we mean by censorship. We have to start with the definition. The definition that I'm going to use is blocking of speech or public communication on the basis of material considered objectionable, harmful, sensitive, or inconvenient. That is a very, very contentious space to be working in. But let's ask, what is censorship and what does it mean online? First of all, we have to admit we wouldn't have the internet today if we had this kind of censorship. Not only because of the First Amendment, not only because of the kind of fertile ground of democracy that allowed the internet to grow, but because of something called the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act in the United States and its equivalent in Europe, which some people have said are basically the 26 words that created the internet. What were those 26 words? They said that no provider or user of an interactive computer service, so that would be a platform, shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of information provided by another content provider. In essence, that means that it creates two, what they call liability safe harbors. On the one hand, these platforms are not responsible for third parties' content that they post on those platforms. They can't be sued. And they are given a kind of Good Samaritan clause, a Good Samaritan pass, that allows them to use their good judgment, work in good faith, to remove content that could be considered dangerous. And that is the kind of basis that allowed for the internet to thrive. It allowed for Yahoo, AOL, Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all the platforms we know, and millions of people to meet online, millions of marriages to take place, family reunions, made us smarter people, created dialogues and discussions like this, basically created the ground that allowed Zoom and WebEx to exist, and even allowed for political action that I think we would all consider to be good. For example, Ukraine's Revolution of Dignity started with a Facebook post in 2013 by Mustafa Naim that called people to the Maidan. So how did the situation change? What is different now? Well, as we've heard, we do have a situation where there is some monopolistic tendencies online, but is censorship the answer? I think if we ask the question, is censorship democratic, we'll say no, because it limits free expression and narrows the plurality of views. And as we all know, in Europe and in the United States, we have deep constitutional protections for freedom of speech and expression. But it's not just that. That's not just the only aspect of democracy that's under threat. The people themselves are against censorship online. And we've seen this in street protest, for example, against the copyright directive and the upload filter last year, where hundreds of thousands of people in Germany took to the streets. 5 million Europeans signed petitions to get this upload filter removed, a preemptive form of censorship. The Polish government has come out against it. But it's not just that. If we're putting in place laws that force platforms to be censored, we have to ask, who's making the decision? Who decides? Germany has done this. They put in place a law called the NetzDG, which basically forces platforms to hire thousands of content monitors. And these content monitors have two responsibilities. First of all, they've been deputized, essentially, by the German government to become censors. They have, the German government has outsourced the role of kind of Ministry of Information to platforms like Facebook to monitor hate speech. Is that really what we want? We're creating, through regimes that push for a narrowed idea of expression and speech, a role for platforms that we don't want them to have, which is a state role. And, do we want this to be in the hands of individuals, private companies, or even artificial intelligence? Who is monitoring these arbiters of truth? And who's going to protect against overzealous enforcement? I think these are big questions that we need to deal with, and I'm looking forward to the debate.
Thank you very much, Tyson. And thank you both for what I think has been a very interesting first round. Moving on into the second round, I'm going to ask questions to both Alina and Tyson, to which please be very brief in answering, no more than 2 at the most 3 minutes, so we can have quite a good number of these questions. And also, when you do answer my questions, you're also free, of course, to address any of the issues that your opponent would have raised. So let me start again with Alina, and I'll pick up to something that Tyson has said already. You said that there should be a public body which should be in charge of censoring this social media. While I presume you don't mean an agora like we had in Greece, where everybody gathers and decides on what should be censored. What kind of public body do you have in mind, and how would we ensure, or somebody ensure, that their censorship is not subjective?
Maybe the word censorship is the elephant in the room, and probably we are talking more about regulating the big platforms and regulating their huge access to data, their capacity of being gatekeepers. The discussion is definitely complicated. because there is an accountability gap between the private superpowers and the political superpowers. There is an information gap because platforms have all the access to their own algorithms, to their search engines, to our personal data. There is a talent gap. I mean, there are hundreds of engineers working at Facebook and probably 10 NGOs activists fighting for the right to be rightly informed. And again, there is an accountability gap between public bodies and private bodies. And I think what makes the discussion even more complicated is that disinformation, hate speech, hate online, defamation take place internationally, cross-border. So I think that there should be an alliance of public bodies trying to regulate these things. So again, the discussion is definitely complicated, but I think that complexity and difficulty should not be an excuse for inaction. And just a very quick reference to what Tyson has said during his previous speech about the Communication Decency Act. You are completely right, but Communications Decency Act is already obsolete because it does not apply, for example, for ISIS propaganda or for child pornography. So actually my point is that there is a lot of censorship or regulation which is taking place on digital platforms. My point is that this kind of regulation should not be exercised only by the digital platforms themselves, self-censorship or self-regulation, but should be put under the checks and balances system, which is again a fundamental feature of Western liberal democracies.
Tyson, you are of course free to respond to what Alina said, but I also have a question for you because you mentioned political action, how the social media allows for political action, which is true for Ukraine, which is true for Belarus, happening right now, but also at the same time, the social media allows for political interference in elections in some of the countries by some other countries. So how do we cope with that if the social media remains uncensored?
Yeah, I think talking about a little bit of an asymmetry. We got to be careful to avoid a kind of hammer and nail syndrome. You're right that there is political interference that takes place through the vector of social media. The question is, how do you best combat that? Is the best combat to narrow the field of information that is available to the public? That violates the right that Alina mentioned of the right to be informed. Rather, what we need are independent institutions that have the public trust, that can check sources, that can check content and basically contextualize that content. And we need to have a critical public that is trained to identify what is true and what's not true. And that's why I would take slight issue with some of the new rights that Alina mentioned. First, she mentioned the right not to receive unwanted information. We're going to receive unwanted information. That's the definition of a pluralistic information ecosystem. We do not want to narrow the information space to filter bubbles that only reaffirm our predisposed biases. She also mentioned the idea of not the right not to receive false or misleading information. I don't think that that's appropriate either, because we want to have a critical electorate of citizens that are able to identify what is true and what's false. We don't want to protect them in a bubble. We want to create a very discerning, critical voters who are able to participate actively in their democracies. And one other point that I think is worth mentioning, Alina mentioned, that there are some exceptions, carve-outs for child pornography, for terrorism action online. That's true, but we have to be very careful about what the proportionality is when we're defining that. In laws like, for example, the German hate speech law, when the language is so broadly defined, it really depends on who's wielding that hammer. For example, the Russians have taken that law, the German law on hate speech, and basically implemented it word for word Russian law. But nobody, I think, assumes that the spirit of the German law will be implemented in the same way in Russia. So we always need to ask, who decides? who are the ones using these instruments, and what is the intent behind that usage? Same thing goes for the United States. It's different to talk about an Obama administration enforcing or questioning certain carve-outs and a Trump administration questioning carve-outs based on Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Rather than rely on the actors, let's rely on the law and give actors the broad that supports a pluralistic information ecosystem.
Thank you, Tyson. You said rely on the law and not on the actors, yet there are countries and there are rule of laws and rule of law, to put it this way. Alina, to pick up on what Tyson said, we shouldn't be creating a bubble in order to protect the public, and the public should be critical. Of course, this is ideal. How do we get there? Do we need to censor the media before the public becomes critical and is able to self-censor whatever they read or whatever they want to digest?
Probably this is a chicken and egg question. I mean, do we start with an informed public, or do we start with some strong regulations in order to make sure that the public is able to get to the right information? So my point is that this discussion about regulations should not be the magic bullet. I mean, we shouldn't expect regulation or censorship, if we stick to the word, to be a magic bullet solution. But I think that in order to fight disinformation and fake news and conspiracy, especially in vital things such as the health sphere, we should have a multi-level approach. So regulation is one of the many approaches in order to deal with this anomalies of the public information sphere. My point is that we shouldn't rely on the public, on an ideal notion of the public that is informed, but I think that again we should approach the subject from various points of view. Again, my opinion is that regulation, and an updated regulation that takes into account the monopolistic power of digital platforms, their gatekeeping function should be complemented with actions about digital literacy, media literacy, technological literacy for decision makers and for regular people alike.
Thank you, Alina. Tyson, you mentioned and you rightly said that censorship is not democratic. Of course, it's not democratic, but then neither is interfering in other countries' political activities, or in other countries' elections, influencing other countries' elections, which is a threat to one country's security. How do you reconcile democracy and security when it comes to social media enabling such threats to security?
Well, I think that one of the best checks or areas of accountability for social media is a discerning public itself. And I think that what we've seen after 2016, for example, in a lot of the kind of coordinated inauthentic content and behavior that was created online, has felt the ferociousness, the ferocity of public pressure, both from legislatures and from the public itself, to change its behavior. And what we're seeing, for example, right now with social media, and this is, I would not classify this as censorship, it's changing their behavior themselves, comes from a kind of, an informal normative pressure from this discerning electorate. So there are ways to adjust for, let's say, RT or Sputnik or bots online that diminish the power and the authenticity that they derive from an uncritical public without blocking them. So, for example, you can create bans on advertisement based on terms of service in social media. You can make sure that they're not promoted posts. Because social media is a curated space, the social media platforms have a lot of decisions about what rises, what gets a lot of viewership and what gets little viewership. They can create incentives to encourage authentic information and discourage inauthentic information. And they can create, as Twitter did with Donald Trump's tweets, wrapped context. So they can say, well, if Donald Trump is saying that, voter fraud is rampant and don't trust voter fraud, they can say, this information isn't true, this is not verified. They didn't block what he said, they didn't censor it, they contextualized it. So I think that there are a lot of tools in the toolbox that we can do before we reach for the blunt instrument of censorship.
Thank you both for making your case. The time for the debate is up. I would like to do the poll again to see if any of the debaters have succeeded in shifting the opinion. So once again, a pop-up will show up on your screen. Those of you who are watching us in WebEx, do please vote. Should social media be censored? Yes or no? And I do encourage those of you who didn't vote in the beginning to vote again, even to vote now, even if this will shift a little bit the results. But we have enough mathematicians here to figure it out at the end. Just a few more seconds for the results to kick in. Okay, so those of you, now more of you voted, thank you very much for that. And those of you who voted yes this time are 6, not 4, so a little bit of increase here. And those of you who voted no, so the social media should not be censored, are now 13, up from 7 before, so almost doubled up the percentage and the increase. So I guess we'll calculate the percentage to be more accurate, but my mathematics tell me that the defender who defended against social media being censored has shifted the opinion a little bit. Probably if the debate was a little longer, we could have seen either a bigger shift or a shift in the other direction. Thank you, Alina. Thank you, Tyson, for taking up the challenge and for being so eloquent and so succinct. Thank you, everybody, for watching us on WebEx and for voting. Next time, we hope that the voter turnout is going to be 100%. And those of you watching us on Facebook, next time, make sure to watch us on WebEx so you can vote as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.